There is something profoundly and uniquely grotesque about watching a person publicly celebrate the restriction of abortion access as though they have just witnessed some grand moral triumph. Not defend it reluctantly as a tragic necessity, not frame it as an unfortunate but principled compromise, but openly cheer it, gloat about it, and treat the reduction of reproductive autonomy as a cause for joy. That reaction reveals something deeply unsettling about the celebrants' moral psychology because whatever euphemisms they may prefer, whatever sentimental slogans they may wrap around their position, the substance of what they are celebrating remains the same. The state making it harder for desperate, frightened, unwilling, or unprepared people to avoid pregnancy and childbirth. They are celebrating the narrowing of escape routes. They are celebrating the increased likelihood that more pregnancies will be carried to term not because they were wanted, not because they were chosen, but because legal and logistical barriers prevented termination. They are, in plain terms, celebrating coerced gestation, and there is something morally diseased about taking pleasure in that. What makes it especially repellent is that these people insist on presenting themselves as paragons of compassion while doing so. They call themselves defenders of life, protectors of innocence, champions of morality, as though cheering the forced continuation of pregnancy were akin to rescuing a child from a burning building rather than the far uglier reality of state-imposed bodily obligation. But one need only scratch the glossy moral paint for a moment to see the rot underneath. Because what is actually being celebrated here is not life in any meaningful ethical sense. It is not the flourishing of sentient beings, not the reduction of suffering, not the cultivation of well-being. It is the preservation of gestation at nearly any cost, regardless of context, regardless of consequence, regardless of the wishes or welfare of the person carrying the pregnancy, and regardless of the future life being imposed. It is a fixation not on life as lived, but on birth as an abstract symbol, treated as inherently sacred even when the resulting existence may be saturated with misery. That is the core obscenity of the forced birth worldview. It fetishizes creation while showing startling indifference to what is created. It reveres the act of bringing someone into existence while paying comparatively little mind to the actual conditions of that existence. Whether the child is wanted, whether they will be loved, whether they will be born into poverty, neglect, abuse, instability, illness, or profound suffering, these concerns often register as secondary, if they register at all. The objective is simply that birth occur. Once the infant emerges, once the ideological ritual has been completed, and another life has been successfully drafted into existence, the celebrants often lose interest with remarkable speed. The same people who crow endlessly about protecting the unborn routinely oppose the very social systems that would improve the lives of the born. Healthcare, childcare, food assistance, housing support, education funding, maternal protections, and anti-poverty programs. One is forced to conclude that if their concern truly centered on reducing suffering or promoting flourishing, their politics would look radically different. Instead, what emerges is the far uglier possibility that the suffering is not a bug in the system, but an acceptable trade-off, perhaps even part of the moral logic itself. Because for many within this worldview, pregnancy is not merely a biological process. It is a disciplinary institution. It is framed as consequence, obligation, moral correction. A woman who becomes pregnant is often treated not as a person confronting one of the most physically invasive and life-altering conditions imaginable, but as someone who has incurred a debt and must now take responsibility. The language gives the game away. Pregnancy is not regarded as a burden to be compassionately managed, but as a lesson to be endured. It is punishment moralized. It is reproductive coercion recast as ethical accountability. The fact that many of the same voices are most animated when discussing pregnancies resulting from consensual sex rather than medical tragedy or assault only further exposes the punitive undercurrent. They are not merely protecting fetuses. They are enforcing a sexual and reproductive code through state power. They are using pregnancy as a mechanism of social discipline. And there is something deeply barbaric about that when one stops to think seriously about what pregnancy entails. Pregnancy is not a minor inconvenience. It is not a temporary lifestyle adjustment. It is a major medical and biological ordeal involving profound hormonal, physical, emotional, and systemic changes to the body. It can permanently alter physiology. It can damage organs. It can disable. It can traumatize. It can kill. To compel someone to remain pregnant against their will is to compel them into months of bodily occupation, medical risk, and potentially lifelong consequence. We would regard forced use of someone's body in almost any other context as an ethical horror. We do not compel blood donation. We do not compel kidney donation. We do not force citizens to surrender bodily resources to sustain another life, even when doing so would save someone already fully born. Yet in the context of pregnancy, vast swaths of society abruptly abandon bodily autonomy principles and pretend the pregnant person's sovereignty over their own flesh has become negotiable. It is a stunning moral inconsistency, sustained only by tradition, sentimentality, and ideological indoctrination. But even beyond the question of bodily autonomy lies a deeper and often neglected horror. What exactly is being forced into existence by these policies? Because to compel birth is not merely to compel someone to endure pregnancy, it is to increase the number of conscious beings thrust into a world of unavoidable vulnerability, suffering, and mortality. Every person created is a person exposed to grief, illness, fear, pain, disappointment, humiliation, exploitation, psychological distress, aging, and death. Every person born is a person who may one day beg for relief from burdens they never consented to bear. Every birth is the creation of a new locus of possible agony. That does not mean all lives are net negative, nor does it deny the existence of joy, meaning, love, or beauty. It means only that bringing someone into existence is not some morally neutral or automatically benevolent act. It is the unilateral imposition of the entire human condition upon another being without their consent and without any guarantee that they will regard the imposition as worthwhile. To celebrate policies that increase the number of such impositions is therefore not merely to celebrate more life in the abstract. It is to celebrate the expansion of involuntary risk. It is to applaud the multiplication of sentient beings who will now be subject to all the harms existence can inflict. And to do this while wearing the mask of compassion is especially revolting. It is one thing to hold that abortion is morally wrong and advocate that position soberly with evident awareness of the tragic complexity involved. It is another thing entirely to beam with delight at the thought that more unwilling women will now be cornered into carrying pregnancies and more future persons will be drafted into existence regardless of the quality of life awaiting them. That delight, that emotional gratification is what transforms mere disagreement into moral disgust. It suggests not solemn conviction, but active satisfaction at the narrowing of others' freedom and the expansion of compulsory suffering. For those who have suffered deeply in life, this rhetoric can feel especially monstrous. Many people know intimately that existence is not automatically a blessing. Many have endured trauma, mental illness, chronic pain, abuse, despair, alienation, crushing poverty or grief so profound that to describe life glibly as a gift feels less like wisdom than mockery. To such people, watching others celebrate the forced creation of more human beings can feel like witnessing someone cheer the expansion of a lottery whose losing tickets include torture, terminal illness, lifelong depression, unbearable loneliness, and existential anguish. It reveals an extraordinary indifference to the reality that many people do not experience existence as an obvious favor. And yet the forced birth advocates' answer to this reality is effectively, too bad. Your suffering, and the suffering of others like you, is an acceptable cost of preserving our reverence for birth. That is why this celebration feels so obscene. It is not simply that people oppose abortion, it is that they rejoice in coercion. They exult in reduced autonomy. They applaud increased likelihoods of compelled pregnancy and involuntary existence while insisting they occupy the moral high ground. They demand praise for valuing abstract fetal potential over the lived suffering of actual persons and the unknown burdens of future ones. They speak as though their willingness to force others into sacrifice is evidence of virtue rather than fanaticism, but coercion wrapped in moral language remains coercion. Suffering justified by ideology remains suffering. And a person who smiles at the expansion of involuntary burden while calling it compassion has not transcended cruelty. They have merely spiritualized it. So no, this is not some noble defense of life deserving automatic respect. It is the celebration of state-enforced reproductive compulsion. It is the exaltation of birth over autonomy, dogma over consent, and abstract symbolism over material suffering. It is a worldview willing to force bodily sacrifice on the unwilling and impose existence on the unborn, while refusing to honestly reckon with the immense harm such impositions entail. And when its adherents celebrate these outcomes with smug delight, they reveal the ugliest truth of all, that for many of them, the suffering caused is not a tragic side effect of their principles, but a perfectly tolerable price for the preservation of their moral order. That is why people react to this rhetoric not merely with disagreement, but with disgust. Because beneath the polished language of sanctity and virtue lies a simple and chilling reality. They are cheering for compulsion, cheering for imposed suffering, and cheering for the continued manufacture of vulnerable lives in a world already overflowing with pain, all while demanding to be seen as compassionate for doing so. And that, dear audience, is why the Wilsons are in fact actual subhuman trash. Fuck them.